When I found out that my wife was cheating, I didn't give any signs, organized a perfect dinner, and what she discovered shocked her, but it was too late. The moment that still haunts me began when Sarah excused herself to the restroom, leaving her phone on the table next to her half-finished glass of wine. My gut had been in knots for hours, my instinct screaming that something was wrong. I watched them the entire night. The way Mark leaned in closer when she spoke, the way his hand lingered just a second too long on her back. I was tense, gripping my glass of whiskey so hard I thought it might shatter in my hand. They believed no one noticed, but I saw everything. It was 12:45 a.m. when I did something completely against my principles. While Sarah was away, I grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking. Me, the guy who tears apart courtroom arguments for a living, trembling like a nervous teenager. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything, that I was being paranoid, and I'd laugh at myself later. But deep down, I knew the truth. When I unlocked her phone, yes, I knew the passcode. We were married, after all. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I scrolled through her recent messages. Nothing seemed out of place at first, just the usual chats with coworkers and friends. But then, there it was, a message from Mark. Mark, of all people. At first glance, it seemed harmless. Can't wait to see you tonight. 7 words. 7 simple words that changed my life forever. The kind of message you might send to a friend before a party, right? But that damn smiling emoji at the end. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't just friendly. There was something more behind it, something hidden beneath the surface. My blood ran cold. The words blurred as I stared at the screen, frozen. I scrolled up, hoping to find some innocent explanation, but the more I read, the worse it got. Nothing explicit, of course. They weren't stupid. But the subtext was there. Inside jokes, flirtatious comments, things only they would understand. Remember last time, and I hope we can find a better spot tonight. It didn't take a genius to figure out what they were talking about. I sat there, staring at the phone, feeling the ground fall out from beneath me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my best friend, it was crumbling like a house of cards. You know that scene in movies where time slows down, and the main character has an out-of-body experience? That was exactly how it felt. My entire world was unraveling in slow motion, and I couldn't stop it. I must have read that text a dozen times, my mind struggling to process it. My heart was racing, my palms sweaty, and the sounds of the party around me faded into nothing. For a brief moment, I thought about putting the phone back and pretending I hadn't seen anything. Maybe I was overreacting, right? Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal in its purest form. Sarah came back from the restroom, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. She smiled, asking if I wanted another drink, unaware her world was about to collapse. I slipped the phone back onto the table before she noticed I had it, trying to act normal, even though I felt like I was going to explode. That was the moment I realized our marriage was hanging by a thread, and I didn't know how to fix it, or if I even wanted to. I watched her, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing nothing would ever be the same. I needed more proof. As much as that message tore me apart, part of me still hoped I was wrong. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe that message didn't mean what I thought it did. I tried to convince myself, but deep down, I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to accept it. One evening, when Sarah said she'd be working late, I decided to follow her. It sounds like something out of a bad detective movie, but desperate times call for desperate measures. She'd been working late a lot recently. Big projects, client meetings, tight deadlines. I'd been the understanding husband for weeks, but not that night. I waited until she left, gave her a few minutes, then grabbed my keys and followed. My heart was pounding as I kept a safe distance, making sure she didn't spot me. She wasn't headed toward the office. No, she was driving toward downtown, which set off alarm bells in my head. Why would she need to go to the city center for work? After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a small, nondescript hotel, the kind of place people go when they don't want to be found. My stomach churned as I parked down the street, close enough to watch, but far enough to stay unnoticed. I watched as she got out of her car, glancing around nervously, making sure no one was watching. And then, right on cue, Mark showed up. There he was, my best friend, walking toward her like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't meeting my wife at a sleazy hotel. They didn't waste any time. As soon as he reached her, he wrapped his arm around her waist and kissed her. It wasn't a quick peck. It was slow, deliberate. They were completely lost in each other. This wasn't their first time. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the woman I had loved for over a decade fall into the arms of another man. My best friend. I wanted to storm out of the car, confront them, scream at Mark, drag Sarah out of there. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed more. More proof. I watched them disappear into the hotel, and instead of confronting them, I turned the car on and drove away. Revenge wasn't something I could rush. And that's when Haley, Mark's wife, called me. We hadn't spoken in weeks, but she sounded calm, too calm. After some small talk, she asked me the question I had been dreading. Do you think Mark is seeing someone? I didn't answer right away. How could I? But when I finally admitted the truth, she didn't break down. Instead, she said, let's make them pay. And so, our plan began. Haley and I met the next day at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place no one notices. I arrived first, my thoughts spinning as I tried to decide how to break everything to her. When she finally walked in, she looked nothing like the composed, polished woman I had known for years. She was hollow, her eyes dull, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact, nervously stirring her coffee. The silence between us was heavy, stretching for what felt like an eternity before she finally spoke. He's been distant, you know? Coming home late, making excuses. It's like he's not really there anymore. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. I knew the truth, but saying it out loud felt like crossing an invisible line. One that, once passed, would shatter her world. But she was already standing on the edge, and I could see in her eyes that she needed to know. So when she looked me in the eye and asked, "Do you think he's cheating on me?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "I do," I said, my voice low but steady. "And I think it's with Sarah." The sadness that had weighed down her face shifted almost instantly, replaced by something colder, harder. She didn't cry. She didn't break down. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice suddenly fierce. "Then let's make them pay." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but not in a bad way. There was no plea for sympathy, no desperation. She wasn't looking to play the victim, and neither was I. In that moment, I realized we were on the same page. Haley wasn't going to sit back and let this happen, and neither was I. We were in this together now, and if Sarah and Mark thought they could betray us without consequence, they were sorely mistaken. From that moment, everything changed. Haley and I began meeting more frequently, always under the guise of strategizing our next move. What had started as a plan for revenge soon turned into something more. We were both shattered by the people we had trusted most, and in that shared pain, we found an unexpected connection. It wasn't just about plotting how to expose Mark and Sarah. It was about finding solace in each other. The more we talked, the closer we became. She was the only person who truly understood what I was going through, and I was the same for her. One evening, after weeks of planning and late-night meetings, Haley came over to my place. It had become a sort of routine: dinners, late-night talks, scheming about how we'd take down our cheating spouses. But that night was different. I had made a simple dinner, though my mind wasn't on the food. Our conversation was strained, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. We talked about Mark and Sarah, about how we'd expose them, but there was something else in the air, something heavy and unspoken. Haley looked stunning that night, her dark hair falling loosely around her shoulders, and her eyes, usually clouded with sadness, sparkled with something else. Something raw. She wore a simple black dress, nothing extravagant, but the way it hugged her figure made it impossible for me to focus. As the dinner dragged on, our conversation slowed, the silence between us growing more charged. I could feel her eyes on me, and when I finally met her gaze, she didn't look away. Troy, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. We're just as guilty as they are. Her words hit me hard. She wasn't wrong. In seeking revenge, we were crossing lines of our own. But then she added, I can't pretend anymore. Before I could respond, she reached across the table, her hand resting on my shoulder. Her touch was electric, sending a jolt through my entire body. I knew what was happening, knew what was about to happen, and a part of me wanted to stop it, to pull away. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt, angry, and betrayed, wanted her, needed her. We leaned in, our faces just inches apart, and before I could second-guess myself, our lips collided in a desperate, hungry kiss. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was filled with months of bottled-up emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, and a longing neither of us had admitted until now. Her lips were soft, her breath shaky as she melted into me. There was no turning back. We didn't stop. I pulled her closer, lifting her onto my lap as she responded with equal intensity. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, needing more. We stumbled from the kitchen to the living room, our bodies entangled, a mess of raw emotion and desire. Haley's dress slid off easily, and soon we were lost in each other, our pain and fury pouring into every touch, every kiss. That night, the anger and betrayal melted away, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about the sex, though it was intense, wild, and chaotic. It was about reclaiming something that Mark and Sarah had stolen from us. Our sense of worth, our desire to feel wanted again. For a few brief hours, nothing else mattered but Haley and me. We weren't thinking about revenge or betrayal. We were just two people, lost in each other, trying to forget the mess our lives had become. But afterward, when the heat faded and reality set back in, I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of what we had done pressing down on me. Haley was asleep beside me, her body curled against mine, but I couldn't close my eyes. The truth gnawed at me. In crossing that line, I had become what I hated. I had stooped to their level, and no amount of revenge could ever change that. After that night, everything shifted. Haley and I continued seeing each other, but now every time we met, there was a new tension between us. What had once been a partnership built on shared pain and a mutual need for revenge had become something more complicated. We couldn't stay away from each other, yet every time we were together, we were both walking a tightrope, knowing that we were playing with fire. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah had reached its breaking point. We barely spoke anymore, and when we did, it was cold, detached, like we were two strangers forced to share the same space. The warmth, the love, everything that had once made our marriage work was gone. I was done pretending to be the oblivious husband. I had seen enough. I had heard enough. I didn't want to be the one to walk away looking defeated. No, after everything I had discovered about her and Mark, I was determined to be the one in control. That's when the call came. The one that changed everything. My private investigator had finally delivered the proof I needed. After weeks of following them, digging into their every move, he handed me a folder filled with photos, videos, and screenshots of their conversations. There it was, in black and white, Sarah and Mark, caught red-handed at the hotel. I had all the evidence I needed to not only confront Sarah, but also to take her down in court. I wasn't going to play fair. Cheaters don't deserve fairness. The moment I got that folder, my entire mindset shifted. I had been waiting for this, for the moment I could finally take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let Sarah manipulate her way through this, and I wasn't going to let her turn the tables on me. This was my move. That evening, I set the stage. I cooked dinner, poured some wine, lit candles, made it look like a normal night. When Sarah came home, I could see the suspicion in her eyes. She hesitated at the door, scanning the room like she knew something was off, but she sat down at the table anyway. I played along, acting calm, pretending like everything was fine. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. I watched her grip her wine glass tighter, her knuckles turning white. I started slow, easing into it, giving her a chance to hang herself with her excuses. She tried to justify her late nights, tried to pretend like nothing had changed. That's when I pulled out the photos. One by one, I laid them out on the table. Pictures of her and Mark, laughing, holding hands, and finally, kissing outside the hotel. Her face went pale. She stared at the photos, her hands shaking, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. "How could you do this?" she finally screamed, her voice cracking with a mixture of fear and anger. But there was no remorse in her eyes, just shock that she had been caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just looked at her coldly and said, "You betrayed us, Sarah, not me." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. "I'm filing for divorce. And by the way, I've already spoken to my lawyer." Her face crumpled. She hadn't expected this. She thought she could manipulate her way out of it, maybe even twist the situation in her favor. But now, she was realizing just how wrong she had been. The next day, I filed for divorce, armed with every piece of evidence I had. I hired the best divorce lawyer in the city, someone who would be as ruthless as I needed them to be. We had one goal, to make sure Sarah walked away with nothing. I wasn't just looking for a clean break. I wanted to make sure Sarah felt the full weight of what she had done. My lawyer and I went after everything. Half of all joint assets, the house, the cars, and even the financial stake she had in the business we had built together. This wasn't about walking away quietly. I was going to win, and I was going to take everything she thought she could rely on. Once I filed for divorce, things began to unravel for Sarah faster than I had anticipated. She had underestimated the fallout, still clinging to the hope that she could save face, but the damage was done. Word of her affair with Mark spread like wildfire through our social circles. People who had once admired her started to pull away, distancing themselves from the scandal. The clients she had worked so hard to secure were severing ties with her, not wanting to be associated with the mess she had created. Her once thriving career began to crumble, and no matter how hard she tried to swim against the current, she was drowning. And as for Mark, the arrogant bastard thought he could slip out of this unscathed. But Haley wasn't about to let that happen. She had stayed quiet, letting me take the lead with Sarah, but once I filed for divorce, she struck with precision. Haley wasn't just out for revenge. She wanted to destroy Mark, both personally and professionally. Shortly after I filed, she filed for her own divorce, but she didn't stop there. She exposed everything: the affair, his neglect, and even his shady business practices. Mark had always been reckless, cutting corners in ways that skirted the law, and Haley knew exactly where to hit him. Her accusations were brutal, and they tore him apart. Not only was his marriage in ruins, but his reputation took a nosedive. Haley had done her homework, and she made sure the right people knew about Mark's dirty dealings. Lawsuits started piling up, clients abandoned him, and the once flourishing business he had built was teetering on the edge of collapse. While Mark was distracted, busy trying to salvage what little he had left, I made my move. I knew his business was vulnerable, and I wasn't going to let the opportunity slip by. I struck deals with some of his key clients, the ones who saw the writing on the wall and wanted to jump ship before things got worse. They switched to me without hesitation. Slowly but surely, I dismantled what was left of Mark's business empire. His financial foundation was crumbling, and there was no escape. Watching Mark fall apart, both personally and professionally, brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because I enjoyed seeing him suffer, but because it proved that I had taken control of my life. I hadn't let him or Sarah break me. I had played my cards right, and now they were paying for every betrayal. A few weeks after the dust settled, Haley and I met again. This time, it wasn't about revenge. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed us were gone. We had won. We had taken back control of our lives, and now, things were different between us. What had started as a partnership built on shared pain had grown into something deeper. We weren't just two broken people seeking revenge anymore. We were two people who had found comfort and strength in each other. Our relationship had shifted, and the passion that had once been fueled by anger had transformed into something more real, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. The sex, too, had changed. It wasn't wild and reckless like before. Now, it was emotional, intimate. It felt like we were finally allowing ourselves to let go of the past and start building something real together. Months passed, and eventually, my divorce from Sarah was finalized. I walked away with the house, a large portion of the assets, and full control of the business. Sarah, on the other hand, was left with nothing. She tried to rebuild her life, but without me to lean on, she struggled. Her affair with Mark had cost her more than just our marriage. It had cost her her career, her social standing, and any hope of reclaiming the life she had once known. As for Mark, his downfall was just as spectacular. Haley's divorce hit him hard, and with the mountain of debt he was facing, plus his ruined reputation, he had no way to recover. He had been arrogant enough to believe he could walk away from this without consequences, but Haley and I had made sure that wasn't the case. Mark lost everything: his business, his marriage, his finances. He was left to drown in the very scandal he had created, and there was no one left to help him pick up the pieces. Haley and I, on the other hand, didn't have to hide anymore. Our relationship became public, and neither of us cared what people thought. We had survived the storm, and now we were moving forward, together. We weren't just two broken people anymore. We had one, and now we were free to build something new, leaving Sarah and Mark behind in the wreckage they had caused. I stood there one evening, looking at everything I had gained: my freedom, my business, my future with Haley, and I felt a deep sense of victory. I had played the game, calculated every move, and in the end, I had come out on top. Mark and Sarah had thought they could betray me without consequence, but I had proven them wrong. They were the ones who had lost everything, while I had taken control of my life and my future. And the best part? I didn't regret a single thing. Haley and I continued to grow closer as the months passed. We moved in together not long after both our divorces were finalized. Life with her was different, better. We weren't hiding from the world anymore, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The anger, the bitterness, the sense of betrayal, all of it had faded into the background, replaced by a deep connection and understanding that neither of us had ever found with our exes. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sun set over the horizon, Haley turned to me, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You know," she said, her voice warm and content, "I never thought I'd find happiness again after everything that happened. But now I think we were meant to end up here." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "Me too," I admitted. "It's strange, isn't it? How everything fell apart, only for us to find each other." She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. "We were broken, but we put the pieces back together. And now we have this." I smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. She was right. We had both been shattered by the people we had trusted most, but together, we had rebuilt our lives. And now, we were stronger for it. The road to that moment hadn't been easy. It had been filled with pain, betrayal, and anger. But in the end, it had led us here, to a place of peace, love, and understanding. And for that, I was grateful. As the weeks passed after my divorce was finalized and my life with Haley began to settle into a comfortable rhythm, I thought I'd finally close the book on the painful chapter with Sarah. She was no longer a part of my life, and the anger that had once consumed me had faded into the background. I was ready to move forward. But then, something happened. Something that shattered the fragile sense of peace I'd worked so hard to build. It started with a letter. I found it one morning in my mailbox, tucked between bills and junk mail. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and it was addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Curious, I tore it open and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. As soon as I read the first line, my blood ran cold. _Troy, there's something you need to know about Sarah. I read the line again, my mind spinning. Who could have sent this? What more could there possibly be to know about Sarah that I didn't already? I thought I had uncovered every dirty secret, every lie, and betrayal. But as I kept reading, my heart began to race. You think you know the whole story, but you don't. Sarah's affair with Mark was just the tip of the iceberg. She's been hiding something from you, something far more dangerous. I've tried to stay out of it, but I can't in good conscience let you go on without knowing the truth. The letter ended abruptly, unsigned. There were no details, no explanations, just those cryptic words hanging in the air like a ticking bomb. I stood there in my kitchen, the letter trembling in my hands, my mind reeling. What could this possibly mean? What had Sarah been hiding? I had thought I'd moved on, but that letter dragged me right back into the chaos I thought I'd escaped. There was no way I could ignore it, not when someone had gone out of their way to warn me. I needed to know the truth, and as much as it pained me, I knew the only person who could give me that truth was Sarah. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to approach her. Confronting her out of the blue felt reckless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was hiding, it was big, life-altering, even. I needed to be smart about this. So, I decided to dig deeper on my own first. I had hired a private investigator before, and while I thought we had uncovered everything, it was clear now that we had missed something. I called him again, explaining the situation. He was hesitant at first. After all, we had already wrapped up the investigation months ago. But I insisted. I needed to know if there was anything else in Sarah's past that I hadn't discovered. Anything that could explain this ominous letter. A week later, he called me back, and I could hear the tension in his voice even before he spoke. "Troy, I found something." My stomach lurched. "What is it?" It's complicated. I wasn't sure at first, but after digging through some old records, I found something you're not going to like. Something that explains a lot about Sarah's behavior. He paused, and for a moment, I didn't think I wanted to know. But I had come too far to turn back now. Sarah's been using an alias. Her real name isn't even Sarah, he said. Before she met you, she was involved in some shady business dealings, under a different identity. I felt like the ground had fallen out from beneath me. What do you mean, a different identity? He took a deep breath. Her real name is Jennifer Lowell. She was married before, under that name, to a man named Evan Lowell. He died under suspicious circumstances almost 10 years ago. The police couldn't prove anything, but Jennifer, Sarah, was their prime suspect. The words hit me like a freight train. My mind raced to make sense of it. Sarah, or rather, Jennifer, had been married before, and her husband had died under suspicious circumstances. I felt sick to my stomach. I had known Sarah for years, or at least I thought I had. But this was something out of a nightmare. I tried to piece it together, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. "Are you saying she killed him?" "I'm not saying anything for sure," the investigator replied, his voice cautious. "But the fact that she changed her name and completely erased her past suggests she's hiding something. There were rumors, unofficial reports, that Evan was going to leave her, and then suddenly, he was dead. The case went cold, and she vanished. A few years later, she reappeared as Sarah, and the rest you know." I stood in stunned silence, my mind racing. The Sarah I had known, the woman I had married, had lied about everything. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was dangerous. Had she manipulated me from the very beginning? Had I been just another pawn in whatever twisted game she was playing? I thanked the investigator, hung up the phone, and stared out the window, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I needed answers, real answers, and I knew I wasn't going to get them from anyone but Sarah herself. I decided to confront her. This time, I wouldn't approach her with anger or accusations. No, I needed to keep my cool. I needed to make sure she didn't see this coming. So I sent her a message, asking to meet. Surprisingly, she agreed without hesitation. It was as if she had no idea the walls were closing in around her. We met at a quiet cafe, the same one where Haley and I had first concocted our plan to take down Sarah and Mark. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah looked the same as she always did, composed, confident. But now, I knew better. I knew what was lurking beneath the surface. I sat down across from her, watching her closely. She smiled, that familiar, practiced smile that I had fallen for so many years ago. But now, it only made my skin crawl. "What's this about, Troy?" she asked, her voice calm, almost too casual. I didn't waste any time. "Why didn't you tell me your real name was Jennifer Lowell?" Her expression froze, the color draining from her face in an instant. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in the headlights, but she quickly recovered, her smile faltering but still present. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice cold. "I know everything. I know about your past, about your husband's death. I know you changed your identity. So drop the act, Sarah, or should I say Jennifer? She stared at me, her eyes widening as she realized I wasn't bluffing. The facade she had so carefully constructed over the years began to crack. But instead of denying it further, she let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. So, you finally found out, she said quietly, her voice taking on a different tone, one I hadn't heard before. It was darker, colder. I wondered how long it would take. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why? Why the name change? Why hide your past? She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she studied me. Because I had to. Because Evan was going to destroy me. I did what I had to do to survive. The way she said it sent a shiver through me. There was no remorse in her voice, no regret. Just cold, calculated pragmatism. What happened to him, Sarah? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Did you kill him? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was disturbingly calm. Let's just say, accidents happen, and sometimes people get what they deserve. My heart pounded in my chest, the realization crashing over me like a tidal wave. I had been married to a woman who had orchestrated her first husband's death, who had manipulated and lied her way into a new life. And I had been just another pawn in her game. I sat there, staring at her, wondering how I had been so blind for so long. All the years we had spent together, the memories we had shared, they felt tainted now, poisoned by the truth. She wasn't the woman I thought I had loved. She was something else entirely. I loved you, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. I trusted you. She met my gaze, her expression emotionless. And I loved you in my own way. But love doesn't change the past. It doesn't erase what had to be done. I stood up, unable to sit across from her any longer. I had come for answers, and I had gotten them, but not in the way I had expected. Sarah, or Jennifer, was a stranger to me now. The woman I had once called my wife was nothing more than a mask, hiding the truth beneath layers of lies and manipulation. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth, no matter how horrifying, was out in the open. I could finally move on, truly free from the weight of my past. Sarah was alive, but she was no longer a part of my life. She was a ghost, a memory from a life I had left behind. And as for me, I was ready to start again. With Haley by my side, I knew I had a future to look forward to, one that was no longer clouded by lies. If you like the story, don't hesitate to subscribe and listen to new stories every day. Write in the comments what you like the most.